Okay. Good afternoon, directors. Thank you for joining us here today. This is the inaugural meeting of the Comox Valley Water Committee. My name is Jake Martinson. As the Deputy Corporate Legislative Officer, I'm pleased to call this meeting to order for the purposes of conducting the election for the chair and vice chair positions for 2023. Before we proceed with that process, I will recognize that we are conducting our business today on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. This is our final election for the CVRD bodies for 2023. So as I noted previously with the Sewage Commission, I think the directors are quite familiar with the process. So unless there are any requests for the specific instructions or summary of the instructions, we will proceed by calling for nominations for the position of chair. Before we do so, I would just like to note the one nuance with respect to the Comox Valley Water Committee, which is that voting for the chair and vice chair positions is in accordance with the weighted votes assigned through bylaw 1783. So as opposed to our other bodies, which are one person, one vote. Again, unless there's any questions or requests for more detail on the process, I will start. I see Director Moore, and your hand is raised. Is that in regards to a nomination or a question?
Yes, a nomination.
Okay, thank you. So with that, seeing no request for further information, I will call a first time for nominations for the position of chair. Director Moore.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Director Grieve.
Thank you. I will call a second time for nominations for the position of chair. And I will call a third and final time for nominations for the position of chair. Seeing and hearing no other nominations, Director Grieve, do you allow your name to stand?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then with that, I'm pleased to announce you acclaimed as a chair for the Comox Valley Water Committee for 2023. With that, directors will proceed to the vice chair election. So I will go through the same process, and I'll call a first time for nominations for the position of vice chair. And I have Director Grieve, I believe, first. Director Grieve.
I'd like to nominate Director Moore.
Thank you. And I will turn now to Director Cole Hamilton.
I was just going to do the exact same thing, but I thought I'd get that on record.
Thank you. I will call a second time for the nominations for the position of vice chair. And I'll call a third and final time for the position of vice chair. Seeing and hearing no further, Director Moore, do you allow your name to stand?
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much. She's confirmed in the affirmative. So with that, I'm pleased to announce you acclaimed as vice chair for the Water Committee for 2023. With that, directors, thank you for your cooperation with this process, and I'll turn it over to Chair Edwin Grieve to conduct the rest of the meeting.
Well, thank you all very much. I think everybody was distracted by the fact there were sandwiches happening, and I think that's how I slipped right through. That being said, I think this is one of the major files and certainly one of the biggest success stories we have to crow about at the Comox Valley Regional District is definitely our water committee and our water treatment plant. And the wonderful people we have working up there. So we're going to move right into it. I think the number one agenda item here is the management report. If I have it, please to move for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the management report? Seeing none, I'll call the vote on that. All those in favor of receipt? That carries. And moving on to the public input for the 2023-2027 financial plan, and over to the CAO for introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Directors. And today is the start of our financial planning process for the Water Committee and the Water Services budget. As is custom with the regional district, anytime we talk about the financial plan, we provide the opportunity for public input. In the event that we receive any letters or correspondence that are directed towards this service, we will provide them on the onset of the meeting during the budget process. At this time, we have none, but I'd like to refer the public to our website as shown on the agenda, where one can see the draft financial plan for this service and any other. And we welcome any and all input, and we'll share that with the Board of Directors. Nothing more to report at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So that moves into reports. We have minutes from February 2nd for the Comox Valley Water Management Advisory Committee for receipt. Moving second on receipt. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none on receipt, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that carries. Now the 2023 Comox Valley Water Committee voting structure, a report for receipt. Move second on receipt over to CAO for introductions.
Thank you very much. And Jake Martins, General Manager of Corporate Services, is here to briefly describe the report and answer any questions there may be.
Thank you, Russell, through the chair. Yes, this is the annual report that comes forward to the Water Committee, informing you of the consumption values from the preceding year and their impact on the voting structure, which is outlined in bylaw 1783. The bylaw provides for a baseline of votes established in 1995 and then adjustments to that based on the relative consumption increases that any participant may incur. As per the last number of years, the only change based on that consumption is an increase of 1 vote to the city of Courtenay to bring their total to 7 votes of the 13 total. There's no other changes to report, and each of the jurisdictions has identified their appointments as part of their resolutions last year. So no further changes or are requested or needed at this point, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the directors? We have Director Grant.
Thank you. So seeing that there's no chance to change the governance structure here, because we tried that last time and it was a failure, is there any way to change so that we're not voting, getting extra votes on water based on consumption? It seems completely backwards to where we are in the world these days. It was probably great back in the day, but now you're getting rewarded for using more water, and that's exactly what we're trying to get away from.
Through the chair, changes to the voting structure would be enacted through a bylaw change to 1783. As the directors noted, there was an exploration of alternative options last year. It did not result in a change. However, it's at the purview of the committee if such further changes are desired or requested.
Thank you. And alternate Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'd just like to, the information probably wouldn't have come to this committee or to the town of Comox, but through the City of Courtenay's Water Smart Action Plan, the actual per capita water usage is going down. The challenge that the City of Courtenay has in terms of water consumption is that we have the highest growth in terms of water usage. So we just have more people moving to the actual City of Courtenay, which causes that water usage to go up from the bulk perspective, but the per capita is actually going down.
Any other comment from directors? Director Grant?
But that doesn't change the fact that we're giving you credit for having more consumption, and that's not a good way to be voting. I think that we really fundamentally have to look at how we're doing this and get it so that it's a more even structure where saving water, or maybe you do it per capita, I don't know, but the way we're doing it now is not correct.
And over to Jake.
Yes, and through the chair, I think the one of the fundamental parts of regional districts is that the amount of say any jurisdiction should have in respect of a service should align with the amount of contribution they provide into that service. And while there's all kinds of methods to get to that type of structure, the structure in place through the water committee, although it is based on consumption relative to the baseline values, which were established in 1995, it does provide for essentially a distribution of the weighted votes and the say on these matters in accordance with the level of contribution to the service. So yeah, appreciate that it may be felt by some that water consumption is not an appropriate method to arrive at that result, but there's other ways to get there. And I'd suggest if we didn't base it on water consumption, if we based it on financial contribution, it wouldn't look fundamentally different.
Thank you. And Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm the service participant whose water consumption is about to go up by about 1,000% once we add the Royston to the service. So maybe my suggestion, if Dr. Grant is willing to talk with the chair around potentially, or whether a motion is wanted by the town of Comox right now, but it may be a side conversation around looking at some initial options and then see if a staff report would be warranted after. That'd be a good option, Mr. Chair.
I would possibly suggest that we've got more than 3.5 years to kick this one around again. So maybe it's something to put on the back burner, because it is a changing landscape, as you say. I mean, we're going to be supplying water in the future down south, and it's going to change the whole nature of the beast. I guess one thing that we can be assured of is that whoever uses the most water also pays the most money into the system. So, including all the chemicals and staff time and whatever. So it's all proportionate. Okay, so I guess that brings us to receipt. All in favor? That carries. Now we got the financial plan for the Comox Valley Water System Function 300 to 302 for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Chris LaRose will present this financial plan for you along with Mike Hirschmiller.
Great, thank you, Russell, and through the chair. So Mike Hirschmiller, our manager of water services, and myself have put together this presentation to help summarize the financial plan. So I'll kick it off and then hand it over to Mike for an update of last year's activities and years ahead for operations. Please interject at any point with any questions. This is a big service with significant cost implications to our participants. We want to make sure there's no unanswered questions. First of all, just start off with a description of the regional system. So with the completion of our new water treatment plant and intake, which Mike will get into in a little bit more detail on a subsequent slide, our source intake location has shifted into the lake. The red square in roughly the middle of the screen is the point at which that new infrastructure tied into our pre-existing. So upstream of that is the treatment plant, the intake, and the associated water mains. So downstream of that, the new system, or the new infrastructure tied into the existing transmission system, which includes some old treatment infrastructure that we're in the process of decommissioning and optimizing, and then two main feeds, that one of which runs underneath the Puntland River, down the farm fields to another crossing of the Solon River before heading up into East Courtenay and Comox through a network of transmission mains. And then the other one heading through West Courtenay to a couple of reservoirs there, and feeding that part of the service area before crossing the 5th Street Bridge and also making its way over to the east. So I think there's a total of 6 reservoirs in addition to many kilometers of large diameter of mains. And then the municipalities have their own distribution networks, so they tie into our system at various points. We use a subtraction metering type system, as do the Comox First Nation. And then the system also feeds the rural area, surrounding rural area distribution systems, which have been recently amalgamated into a single service area, which is highlighted in green, kind of wrapped around the core area. So So our water crew here with Mike in the middle at the back there, so led by Mike, they're based up at the new operations center at the water treatment facility. And in addition to managing the regional the kind of intake, treatment, and transmission system, they also manage the surrounding rural area water service area, so 305 Comox Valley Water Local Service Area, as well as 5 other water local service areas scattered around the region. And about 60, so only time spent in the actual services is billed to those services, but we make a projection at the beginning of the year, and we're usually pretty close. So it works out to about 60% of their time and effort is attributed or allocated to this function that we're here to talk about today, and the rest of it is spread between those other service areas. Now I'm going to pass it over to Mike to give us a little bit of a highlight about what him and his crew were up to in 22 and what's ahead for 23.
Thank you, Chris. To the chair. We will, which is the forward.
Yeah, a little sticky.
Okay. Sorry, there we are, the accomplishments. So as Chris mentioned, the kind of highest profile one that we completed and worked on and continue to work on in 2022 was the water treatment plant. You know, during the first year of operations, we took it over in October of 2021 is when we actually moved in there. And after the first few months where we were working very closely with the contractor, we took over ourselves operating the plant. We have four staff that primarily work in the treatment plant, and the rest of the operators are in the distribution and transmission systems. So during this last year, we've been really working through the deficiency list with our contractor. We have deficiencies and warranty items that are still being worked through, but very close. Like the deficiency list is complete. We're just working through a couple of warranty issues now. Process changes. We've been optimizing our chemical usage and also working out some of the kinks with construction. Not really kinks so much, but just trying to change the process to what our operators feel is more appropriate. Getting our maintenance plans in place is a big task for the water treatment plant. We have our, everything's brand new. So all the equipment and all the infrastructure, all the pumps, all the valves, all the, analyzers are all brand new, but you need to start performing maintenance right away. So you don't get behind on the maintenance. So we started right away doing, various maintenance weekly, monthly, and then annually. So we're just kind of finalizing those, a full O&M plan, which is coming together very well. As well as Chris mentioned, the first year of the whole team being up there. So we did move up there in October, and the operation, distribution and transmission team has been really working on, getting our shop in order, our inventory in order, better organization than we had before, as we used to keep our stuff in various spots. Now we've got one spot for it. So that is helping us greatly just, keep track of our inventory and plan construction projects. We went through a full year of operation. We treated about 9 million cubic meters of water and had no boil water notices, which was the point of the plant. So it worked very well. We did actually have about 5 events. We had 5 events this year where the water coming into the treatment plant would have triggered a boil water. Historically, we were well over 1 NTU, and those events lasted for an average of 3 to 5 days. So, looking at that, we've noticed it's something that it doesn't even cause us stress anymore. We don't, the treatment plant doesn't even hiccup at what we saw, and we saw up to 10 NTU coming in very quickly. It goes up fast, and then it takes a long time. As if you remember back to our boil water notices, we usually had that spike right away, and then it kind of tapered off very slowly. So that's exactly what we've noticed this year. Very little change in chemical consumption through those events. So the plant is working really well. A couple other major or a couple other pieces accomplishments on the Comox Valley system was we had a major repair on the high Prescon transmission main, which is the main water main that feeds. I would say it's anything kind of on the east side of the river. So a good portion of Courtenay, the entire town of Comox, and a lot of the surrounding local service area is fed from this main primarily. It's quite a challenging main to fix. I have a photo in the next slide that I'll discuss. Dingwall pump station, that was the hydraulics of the system changed when we built our new water treatment plant in Clearwell. So we were able to turn some of our pumps, which were heavy hydro users, into actuated valves, which basically take no hydro to run. They run off hydraulics, and it's enabling us to keep our reservoirs filled and get rid of some pumps. And then PRV safety upgrades, that's a pressure reducer valve chambers that we have a lot of, we've brought some of the plumbing up so we can access it from the top. And that's just basically a safety thing. And it's also dropped down on manpower and what's needed for this type of maintenance. And then CityWorks, which is one thing that we've been moving a couple years towards working. And this year was our first year where we really were using, the operators were using the technology in the field, using the iPads, and really being able to track our maintenance tasks as well as work orders and service requests very efficiently. So the Comox Valley Water Treatment Plant, just some photos. You've all been there, I believe. And just the top right is a filter bed. The bottom is obviously an outside view of the water treatment plant. And then the top left is just the construction project from start to finish, the lake intake, the raw water pump station and pipeline that gets us to the plant. And then there's a clear well, which is basically a 10 million liter reservoir that holds the treated water. And then we send it down our transmission main. One thing we really noticed this year in operations is moving into the lake, moving off of the river, moving off of BC Hydro's infrastructure, really made for much more of a consistent operation. The river was very flashy and sporadic in the turbidity levels in the river, in the Puntledge River. So whenever there's a storm, and BC Hydro's primary goal is to minimize flooding, the risk of flooding downtown in the city primarily, they would, when the king tides and the storm surges are, they shut the lake off, they shut the gates almost completely. And then so over the years, that's caused major headaches, operational challenges to try and maintain water flow. We used to shut the intakes off quite regularly, watch the tides and then turn them back on. And it just eliminated all that operational challenge this year. But being in the lake, and also the other thing, which big long drought this year, the lake was at some of its lowest levels we've ever seen. The Puntledge River was dropped down to a very below what is recommended for fish flows, below that level. And although our restriction levels are tied to river flow, so we still have to obviously respect and try and minimize our water use. However, the fact that we can't, we won't run out of water for the community is really quite comforting. It brings us a lot of confidence with our ability to deliver water through those drought seasons. The next slide is of our, just some of the repairs quickly. This was that high Prescon repair I was just talking about briefly, and it's very dramatic looking. There's a lot of people working to fix it. This takes about, we've had this is the second time now. It takes about a solid month of planning, preparation to get into place, building roads into the area, having to knock some trees down occasionally. And then this is the repair. And once we actually cut into the pipe, it's around the clock 24-hour work until we get it put back together. So this was in the beginning of March, and it was taken offline for about 4 days to get this repair done. So looking forward to 2023, obviously continue to develop our O&M plans, and a big part of these O&M plans is our standard operating procedures. So we develop SOPs for every part of the maintenance planning, which just takes time and trial and error. So you write an SOP and then you go into the field and you trial it. The South Water Extension Project that's been referred to in this meeting previously. This is the project where we are looking to bring water south to a couple areas in South Courtenay, along the West Courtenay area, as well as in the Buckstone area, and then down to Royston and on to the KFN lands in the south. East Courtney crack repair is one that the concrete reservoir up at East Courtney, which is up near the hospital there. There's a crack in it. We've had it structurally checked by a structural engineer, and it's not posing a risk of catastrophic failure, but it is something that we have identified and want to repair this year. Jackson Drive PRV, one of the things that in the city and the town as well, departments are moving to bring their underground PRV chambers up actually above ground in kiosks, much safer for no confined space entry, as well as just easier for maintenance. We're continuation of our fiber optic project, which is being run by Brian Pearson in our IT department, and that's looking to fiber optically connect our sites, so we aren't dealing with radios anymore, and it's much more reliable communications. And then the completed works for the transmission distribution team for the city works, and then we need to begin the water treatment plant, which is basically bringing over all the assets and getting that into our city works software, so we can more efficiently perform maintenance tasks and have those maintenance tasks scheduled. And that is it for me. If there's no questions, I'll pass it back to Chris.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Alternate Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, it's great to kind of get the update on some of these things. I had a couple of questions. The first one, really happy to hear that those boil waters, when we have those incidents that would, historically cause a boil water, that they're no longer happening. And to your point, that was the whole reason to build this treatment center. The question I have, it actually kind of comes from the management report earlier in the agenda, where one of the things it talks about is the Village of Cumberland getting the grants to actually repair their spillways and dams, and that there had been a meeting. And I just wondered, considering that was a big issue like over 8 years ago, kind of if there's a timeline. I know you've only met once in December, but just wondered if you had anything you could enlighten us around that.
Yeah, I was planning to speak to it on a later slide, but I can definitely provide an update now. So yeah, great news that the village was successful in attracting grant funding for their upgrade or rehabilitation of the Pontoon Dam and the spillway. I don't remember the exact dollar value now, but I think it's between $4 and $5 million. And there's definitely a strong prospect of that, of the work that is planned, as far as we understand the scope, a strong prospect that could significantly reduce the flows down the spillway, which has that area of erosion that's causing the turbidity in the lake. And I think there's also some funds earmarked in that scope for a bit of strengthening or hardening of the spillway channel itself, so that the reduced flows that do end up down that spillway should hopefully have less of an erosion impact on that clay slope. So that's what I know now, and definitely eager to continue to support the village and delivery of that project.
Excellent. And maybe just as a quick follow-up then, when those turbidities did get up, to 10 or higher, were you able to determine if that was coming from that Perseverance again, or was it coming from other sources? Or
we didn't get up to, we don't know exactly where the turbidity is coming from. We saw a similar trend as far as what we used to see when we were tracking it very closely. The trend was after a big rain event, a couple 2 or 3 days later, then we would notice turbidity rise, and then it would slowly drop down. So we saw the same trend. So it's fair to think they were possibly caused by the same situation. However, one thing to keep in mind is, as we move forward and look at treatment changes, as well as our consumption going up, just always the better water quality coming in will help us with treatment, basically, with chemical consumption and with operator and manpower hours and stuff. It's obviously, if you're treating a better quality to start with, it takes less effort to treat it.
excellent. And if I could I had a follow-up question that was separate from this.
Oh, I don't know. Go ahead.
Oh, there's 2 lights on here.
No, I just have
For me to go stare.
Will in the queue.
Were you up as well?
Yeah, I was.
I'll see the table
Well,
for now.
You want to wait?
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay, we'll let Director Cole Hamilton go for that.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the East Courtney crack repair. It sounds from what you're saying like the primary concern is sort of the structural integrity of the reservoir rather than the amount of water we're losing. And I just wanted to confirm that it is a fairly inconsequential amount of water. And if it is consequential, does it get us an extra vote?
It won't matter at the end of the year, it'll be fixed. No, it's structurally sound. That's the first test we do, is to make sure that it is okay and it not needing an emergency repair. It's mostly superficial, but yeah, we want to get the crack repaired before it gets worse. Yeah.
And we're going to go back to Director Wells, alternate Director Wells, because he has a very long vested interest in this committee.
Maybe, but I do appreciate Director Cole Hamilton's comment. But it did trigger the issue of utilizing the city's infrastructure for transmitting water to the town of Comox, and sort of again leakage, O&M, all those kind of costs that are attributed to it. And I didn't. I don't know if that's something that's planned for in like the 5-year financial plan or something that might be coming up sooner.
Yeah, sure. So within this plan and the last plan as well, is funds earmarked for a water master planning process. So that right now that's scheduled to start this year and end next year. And there's a whole range of topics that will be covered, but one of those is to dive into, in consultation with the municipal partners, that very issue, the issue of shared infrastructure, the way for the others' benefit, the way that the system has evolved over the decades is that there's been a fair bit of just making it work kind of an attitude that's really blurred the lines of ownership between town, region, and city. While we have a pretty good handle on the metering of flows, the ownership of some infrastructure it's a little bit gray, and there's some regional infrastructure being used for city purposes and town purposes, and then there's some municipal infrastructure being used for regional purposes. So a big thrust of that water master planning process will be to get a handle on that and work collaboratively to develop a path forward. It's not likely to be a quick fix. It's likely to be a long-term program, but I think this will be the first step.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And then just lastly, oh, sorry, Mike, you wanted to sneak in there?
One quick thing to add to that, just the, one of the reasons it was done the way it was in the past was it was a decision to defer some capital projects that needed to be done, because using a transmission main as being that closely connected to distribution, it helps with fire protection. So it would have been able to defer some projects that likely the city and town would have had to done to increase fire capacity.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, I appreciate that. And then you had talked about, sort of again, those sort of record breaking drought conditions that we had last year. And I just wondered, I guess 2 things. One, did we get pretty close to going to stage 4 water restrictions, or do we not come anywhere near it? And because I know those were kind of created many years ago in 2015. And I just wondered if there is any danger of them having to be actually activated.
So under the commitments we made through the permitting process for the new treatment plant and the increased license capacity, there is a threshold, I think it's 5.7 meters per second of flow down the river. If hydro is forced to drop below that level, then we're forced to go to stage 4. So this year, in the fall, they did come, arguably pretty close to that threshold. I think they dropped as far as 7 CMS. Lower than, like Mike said, lower than we've ever seen before. So not that far off of that lower threshold to stage 4. So yeah, so that is the commitment, and we did come close.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so are you ready to vote on receipt? Looks like all in favor.
Sorry, we're
We're not trying to rush you, Chris. Can you?
all right. So yeah, now to the financial portion of the presentation.
Let's get to the boring part.
Next time we'll hold off the questions. Okay, so we'll start off with the revenue piece. So the service, the almost the entire revenue for the service is derived from the sale of bulk water to our participants. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we did implement the COVID renewal plan. Under that plan, the bulk rate was decreased and then held at 80 cents per cubic meter for 21 and 22. Prior to the pandemic, it was anticipated to increase and hit 96 cents per cubic meter on January 1st of 23. So instead, it was held at 80 cents. And then it proceeded as planned with the increase to 96 cents per cubic meter at the beginning of this year. So it has the apparent look of a big step up, but it's just as scheduled prior to the pandemic. Here's a table just highlighting the increases as approved in the last plan. And so we are forecasting a slight increase in bulk water rate starting next year over and above what was approved for those latter 3 years in last year's plan. So instead of 96, heading up to $1, just to ensure that we have adequate reserve contributions to make sure we're putting aside enough funds in the capital works reserve for future asset liabilities. Yeah, this clicker is problematic. So personnel, this is the first thing I wanted to highlight. So the proposed budget projects a 1% decrease in personnel costs. Since the proposed budget was nailed down in late January, we have identified a small error in the allocation of operators between our services. And the correcting that, which we will do for the recommended budget, will result in instead of a 1% decrease, it'll show between a 1% and 2% increase to personnel costs for the service. This would be below what we would typically see, given the regular wage increases scheduled in the QP agreement, and that slight offsetting of those increases is just due to how another change in how positions are allocated between these services and to the support services budget. Next is operating. So we're projecting a 20% increase in operating costs year over year from 22 to 23. The vast majority of that, so I've provided this table below just to highlight what that approximately, so 20% increase, 590,000, what that breakdown is for that increase. So the biggest piece by far is support services. Support services are all of the budget for all of the corporate services. So IT, big portions of IT, finance, the CAO's office, and other pieces are billed between services based on a formula. A key variable in that formula is the level of capital spending within a given service. And that's based on a 5-year rolling average, with the completion of the treatment project now squarely within that 5-year period. We're seeing the full brunt of that increase in the share of the capital. And again, that's related to kind of reflective of the additional load that delivery of such a large project places on our support services. And the next one I just wanted to highlight was a return to pre-pandemic spending levels for educational programs, so relating to water conservation. Also, we've seen a bit of a decrease in professional fees that have helped to offset a little bit these increases. Minor capital, we're implementing a backup radio system for the service as one of the action items that came out of the earthquake exercise last fall. And then we're also seeing a return to pre-pandemic spending for watershed protection plan implementation. So this is just a return back to pre-pandemic levels of cost. And I'll provide a bit of a summary of what our focus is on that subfunction on the later slide. On the capital side, so our dollar values per year, as you can see by the table at the top, have come down significantly since the completion of the $121 million water treatment plant. So in 22, we spent 1.8 million. Looking ahead to this year, we're at 6.4. You can see over the next 3 years, we've got some elevated capital spending as we deliver the Water South Extension project. that project is funded by grants and contribution from others. So the service itself is not funding any of the capital works, but we are delivering it, and we will own that infrastructure at the end of the project. Other projects on the service will be funded through a combination of capital works and DCC reserves. So no anticipated borrowing. And here's just a quick summary of what we're looking at for capital in the coming year. So the bulk being the Water South Extension project, allowance for annual capital equipment, vehicle purchase. That 125K represents 2 vehicles. This is part of our vehicle replacement plan. Previously, that would have been 100K, but 50K budgeted per vehicle, but we've increased that to accommodate the higher cost for electrical vehicles. So per our corporate policy, we're striving to have all vehicles replaced with EVs by 2030. So that means for 23. So with a 7-year horizon on vehicle replacement, we need to start now. So that premium then for that piece is that 25,000 for the EV. For the water treatment plant, it's almost coming up on 2 years since completion, but there's a couple final items there we're working out. So that's the $500,000, and then annual capital projects. And I had a note about what that was. Sorry to put you on the spot, Mike.
Just the ones that we discussed, like those are the crack repair, the PRB, stuff like that.
That's right. Yeah. So for a total of 6.4 million for the year. And then finally for reserves, with the treatment plant complete, both the capital works and DCC reserves are already starting to recover. And like I said earlier, we're setting our minds to the asset management system and the replacements and upgrades that have been flagged by that system, making sure that we're striking, being able to fund a significant portion of those future projects with our reserves. And then just very briefly, subfunction 301 is delivered under this financial plan, so watershed protection. So last year at that decreased level spending, we still managed to progress the management plan for Coal Beach property. We completed our update of the watershed protection plan risk assessment. There was a report brought forward in that last year on that one, and we continued our education and outreach for watershed protection. Looking ahead at the coming year, we'll be completing the management planning process for Coal Beach property in collaboration with the Cumberland Community Forest Society in the village of Cumberland, returning to the pre-pandemic levels of education and outreach for watershed protection, and increasing the water conservation component, supporting the village of Cumberland's upgrades to the Pontoon Dam and spillway, implementing the first of 3 thermistor strings in the Comox Lake. That will give us some visibility into how the thermoclines work within the lake and contribute to water quality. And then finally, continuing implementation of our water quality monitoring program for the key tributaries to the lake. So in summary, just tying these back to our core strategic priorities. So from a fiscal responsibility perspective, we did manage to do a little bit to help ease the pain of the pandemic during 21 and 22 by by reducing our bark water rates. Now it's time to bring those back up to make sure that to ensure the sustainability of the service. From a climate and environment perspective, all rural connections are metered. Courtney and Comox, all commercial and many residential connections are metered, and more every year. Water conservation is definitely a priority for all partners, and we're all collaborating in implementation of the watershed protection plan. From a community perspective, the service itself, as was noted earlier, is an important partnership between all local governments in the CVRD, supplying water to over 50,000 people. And the implementation of the watershed protection plan is guided by the watershed advisory group with representation from a wide range of stakeholders. And finally, the Indigenous relations. So the recently completed water treatment project was facilitated and made possible by the mutual benefit agreement signed with the KFN in 2018. We're working closely with the KFN on water, on getting water to the KFN development lands and ensuring that they're engaged on all key strategic water related issues. And the KFN is now an observer, has been invited to be an observer on the water committee. So that's all we have today on the plan, but happy to answer any questions.
We'll take some questions. Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. The budget looks really good, and I was really glad in the other project there with the South connection to see that inflation is not wreaking too much havoc on that project. So that's good news. I had a question about the watershed efforts, and in the rural areas, we're currently doing a watershed service study that is looking. I think everybody has paid attention to what happened in Seychelles this fall and the kind of real threat to climate impacts around watersheds and our sources. It sounds like with Comox Lake, we're not as much at risk, though that was kind of scary to see the lake level. I went for a walk there in the fall, and that was pretty horrid. But part of that is just BC hydro management as well to generate electricity. But my question is there any interplay between the watershed service that we have here and the one that the rural areas are exploring? Because at electoral area services, we're looking at something modeled a little bit after other jurisdiction like the regional district of Nanaimo, looking at broader effort, not just focused around Comox Lake, but around water management and incentives for people, and really trying to broaden basically care of water. So is there an intersection between our existing watershed program in this service and the potential watershed service in the rural areas?
Yeah, I can answer that, Chair. And yes, there is the potential. I think the concept of the electoral area service needs to develop a little further, and we will be coming forward to the electoral area directors to talk about that. And as it takes, if it takes hold and takes the initiative, the potential of joining the two services, at the very least relying on the experts that we have that help us manage the Comox Valley watershed or Comox Lake watershed is things that we will look at and suggest to you.
Oh, one more light. Okay. Director Grant.
I just turned it on. So Chris, during the election, I ran into not just one or two, but several people, generally older folks, that were really concerned about us running out of water. And they were citing the fact that with all the new construction and all the apartments going up in Courtney and Comox and all of that we're going to run out. And so when I look at that and I say our education program, we tend to do education around conservation, but perhaps something on the entire system and how it works. And that, I mean, I assume we're not running out of water, but and there's no concept there about hydro and how they play into it at all either. But it was a real concern, and I must have heard it 20 times. So there's a bit of a thing going on out there.
No, thanks for this address, Director. I think to reiterate Mike's point, earlier on the slide showing the shift in intake from the river to the lake, the bottom line is, we will not run out of water. That shift in infrastructure has been, should provide a massive comfort to the community, because our intake is now well below the lowest level of that can leave the lake through the dam. That being said, we obviously still have we have a regulatory commitment under our license, and also an ethical one to do our part to help mitigate the risk of that happening, of the river running dry. So I think just in response to the suggestion, I think we will definitely take that away. We put a lot of work into some relevant messaging when we were delivering the treatment project, and we had some graphics kind of trying to highlight the physical constraints of the lake, the depth of the storage, the accessible storage, where our intake location would be. So we can see about weaving some of that information into the water conservation related material that we generate this year and next. Yeah.
And Director Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair Grieve. I just had a question actually about the appendix on the corporate energy and emissions plan. Is is it okay to ask questions about that as well?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. The thing that was really intrigued me was that between 2020 and 2021, our emissions related to electricity decreased by about 2/3, which is obviously encouraging. And there's a note that says that in 2021, the province significantly reduced the GHG emission intensity factor for the BC hydro grid. That's a significant reduction. If it's almost 2/3, is that that lowering in emissions from electricity entirely attributable to that? And if so, can you tell me a bit about what it is that BC Hydro, like how it is that BC Hydro came to that conclusion?
You know, I'm aware of that change and the significant impact it's had on our apparent emissions. I don't have much background in terms of why or how they felt they were able to make that significant shift in the intensity of our kind of energy portfolio here in the province. But it certainly has had a big impact on our reporting.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I'm guessing that factor is going to play into a number of our emission targets and the success we're having with them. And that's because we use electricity throughout all of our operations. Is it possible to have a brief staff report that just explains how it is that those significant reductions in electricity carbon intensity are being achieved?
Absolutely. I think I'm not certain that belongs with the water department. What I'll do is I'll take that away and bring it up with the folks that are leading
that'd be more appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's certainly I'd like personally to have a better answer to that question.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm seeing from our CEO that looks better for me to raise that at the main board. Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, that brings us to a point where we can call to vote on receipt. I would say one thing, and that's that a number of years ago when we brought up the issue of water meters, the cry from the public was, oh, we live in a rainforest, we'll never run out of water. I think those opinions have shifted over the years, and we've all seen the spikes, water use in the summer, and we know that grass farming in the way of lawns is not really farming. So, you know, brown is beautiful. Get back to the education piece. I think we have to keep that in front of the public so they realize that it's not a resource that can be taken lightly. We have to tread lightly on that. We've seen where we had some years, especially the last year, we've had such incredible drought going on for so long. So I think public opinions are changing. We just need to keep working on it and make people realize that every drop is precious. Okay, on receipt, all in favor? And we have a recommendation. Moving to second on the recommendation. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none on the recommendation, call the question. All in favor? And that carries. Moves us right along to the Eastern Comox Lake Watershed Boundary Delegation or Delineation, I beg your pardon. Moved and seconded.
Thank you. And Chris LaRose will present this report as well.
Thank you, Russell, through the chair. So the staff report on your agenda is a cover report for the attached study by GHD. So given the development plans within the village's Bevan Road industrial lands, and to be clear, on some uncertainty on our part regarding the actual watershed boundary, drinking watershed boundary in this fairly complex area, we initiated the work with GHD just over a year ago because they've done extensive work in this area. A lot of that with our CSWM, so the waste management function, working to monitor the groundwater flow around the landfill site. So they were able to build on that local knowledge and in combination with LiDAR data that we collected under the watershed protection function. So with much higher quality topographical data to provide us a much better understanding of how the water flows on the surface and underground in that area, to work towards a much higher level of certainty regarding the watershed boundary. And so what they found is that less of the watershed actually overlaps with the development lands than previously thought. So using the old watershed boundary, which was based on probably a manual exercise looking at contour lines in that area. They found so under the old boundary, there was about 97 hectares of land that overlapped between the Bevan industrial lands and our drinking watershed. With the new watershed boundary, it's shrunk down to 52 hectares, and most of that falls with below the edge of the escarpment. That entire area is kind of a large kind of gravel deposit, as you would know from all of the mines in the area there. So it falls to the north towards Morrison Creek and then towards Comox Lake on the other side. So the bulk of that remaining 52 hectares falls below the escarpment between there and the lake, in the area of Black Lake and the Coal Beach property. So we've met with the Village of Cumberland staff. We've provided an overview of the outcome, and they've expressed support for the new boundary. So I think it's good. It's good news. It means there's less of a conflict between the protection of our drinking water and the development of their industrial lands. So we're recommending that staff be directed to work with the village to ensure development in the Bevan lands minimizes impact to the drinking watershed, and also that the report and attachment be shared with the Comox First Nation, just based on their strongly expressed interest in water resources in general, but also specifically in this area. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about this report or recommendation.
Thank you. And Director Arbor?
Thanks, and I must admit I wasn't able to go through the full report this weekend. There was a lot of readings, but in terms of the hydrogeology, but in that regard, like I can definitely appreciate that it's easy with LiDAR to identify the surface boundary. Maybe a little harder once you go underground. So what kind of assumptions exist around the groundwater regime, and are you looking at the basic inclination of geological formation, or do you have any insight on how they arrive? Because I think most of the concern would probably not be surface water, it'd be how it percolates through the groundwater and then towards Comox Lake.
Agreed. Yeah, no, certainly the bulk of it is the inclination of the subsurface geology. So immediately to the lake and slightly towards Cumberland side of the landfill, there is an underground kind of protrusion of bedrock, which isn't necessarily visible from above, but we actually encountered it in construction of our new transfer station up there, and it's reflected in this work. So groundwater flows away from that, which means that the vast majority of the industrial lands is downslope and has that between it and the lake. And then so there is some discussion about the seasonality. And so there is a likelihood that the source of the springs that feed Morrison Creek originates in Comox Lake. So there's some cold, steady flow of water that enters Morrison Creek, which is almost certainly slowly permeating from the lake. And so there is some impact of that 5 meters of live storage in the lake does actually change the hydrostatic pressure of providing the force behind that water that moves from the lake down to Morrison Creek. So during periods of the year where the ground is saturated, there may be some slight differences in how rainwater that falls on the surface, which direction it flows. But I think the conclusion generally is that there are sections on the top of the escarpment where, even though it may be slightly below and towards the lake from the height of land, that it infiltrates and heads towards Morrison Creek. Yeah.
And Director Kerr?
Thank you. When I see industrial lands and watershed on the same, map together, it makes me a little nervous. These industrial lands, just so I understand, and again, I'm coming in this partway through, what are the expected or potential uses? Like, are we talking about heavy industrial use and therefore leakage of chemicals and such, or are we talking about light industrial use? Thanks.
Yeah, I think your concerns are reflected in the staff, and certainly that's why we put a fair bit of effort into working with the village to better understand what's planned in the area and undertaking this work. So we have a much better idea of where to focus our advocacy. So at this point, I think it's fairly early on in the development of these lands, and they do have fairly blanket, heavy industrial. A portion of those lands are zoned heavy industrial, which would theoretically allow for a wide range of potentially impactful industrial activities. But in practice, what will actually get developed there is it's not clear. But I think what this work concludes, the conclusion of this work is that it should be far easier to work collaboratively with the village to ensure to put the mechanisms in place to ensure that those kind of more harmful activities don't take place within the drinking watershed.
Director Arbor?
Yeah, I think this term, it might be good to have more discussions on that because there's, I know the village has reserved a bunch of those lands for preservation, kind of as sort of a buffer, but as you're getting these geological information, it will influence, and partly why I think it's especially relevant to the CVRD. Well, one is we have, of course, our waste management center, but beyond that, I think in that whole area, we don't have a lot of industrial land in the valley. And I don't know what KFN's ambitions are around the treaty lands, but there's could be opportunities there. But right now, that's the main source of industrial land is located there. And some of us have ambitions around creating a circular economy hub built around the waste management and seeing more recycling facilities and reusing facilities. And so I think the more we understand the ecology, the hydrology, and all the rest of it, it will really inform both the village and ourselves in our ambition, or perhaps constrain our ambitions, as Director Kerr noticed.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receipt. All in favor? That carries. And a motion for the recommendations of the Comox Valley Regional District staff work with the Village of Cumberland staff to ensure that development of the Bevan industrial lands minimizes risks of water quality impacts in the Comox Lake watershed. And further, that this report be shared with Comox First Nations to allow for additional input and considerations around watershed management in this area. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that. All those in favor? And no one opposed, and that carries. Move a second on termination. All in favor?